The key was still warm in my hand when I pushed open the glass door to Eli's office. February sunlight cut through those panels like knives, and for a moment I couldn't see anything but my own reflection, a 63-year-old woman with grief carved into her face, standing at the threshold of a place her son had kept sealed shut for 3 years. I hadn't planned to open it that morning. I was supposed to be at the lawyer's office going through his estate paperwork, sorting through the life insurance documents, and the deed to this house I now owned alone. But something broke inside me around 7 in the morning, something that made me walk past the coffee I'd poured and straight out to the backyard where that glass box sat like a terrarium holding secrets instead of plants. The smell hit me first. Not dust or neglect. Nothing like that. It was clean, almost sterile, with something underneath. Something metallic and faint, like old pennies or batteries left in a drawer too long. The air was perfectly still, the kind of still you only get in spaces no one has moved through in weeks. On the walls, and this is where I froze, where my legs nearly buckled, were photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to corkboards that covered every inch of the white walls. Faces I didn't recognize. Men, women, couples, children. Black and white mostly, some in color. Each one positioned with purpose, with intention. This wasn't a collection. This was a catalog. And there, on the far board, near the window that faced the oak tree Eli climbed as a boy, was my face. Me from a photo taken at least 5 years ago, the one from that spring when I was still smiling without forcing it. My hair was darker then. My eyes hadn't learned all the things they know now about loss. Under my photograph, in his handwriting, the same precise print he'd used to label his books, to mark his calendar, to write the notes he left on the kitchen counter, were 4 words. Debt settled. Final promise kept. My hand reached out but didn't touch anything. I was afraid that if I touched it, the dream would break and I'd wake up back at the funeral, back at the moment the funeral director told me my only son was gone. But this wasn't a dream. The walls were real. The photographs were real. That line under my face was real. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Every single face on that wall had a story pinned beneath it. Names written in the same careful script. Dates. Numbers I didn't understand. Cities I'd never heard of. Denver. Biloxi. Tulsa. Portland. Places Eli had mentioned maybe once or twice in phone calls, always quickly, always changing the subject. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My son. The boy who brought me wildflowers in 3rd grade, who held my hand through my father's funeral, who called me every Sunday at 5 o'clock. My son had been living a life I knew nothing about. A life lived in this glass room, surrounded by strangers and secrets, and something that looked a lot like obsession. That's when I realized grief doesn't just take people away. Sometimes it replaces them. Sometimes the person you buried isn't the person you thought you knew at all. Sometimes love blinds you so completely that you can live in the same house as a stranger for decades and never see them clearly once. I needed to know what all this meant. I needed to understand who my son really was. And I needed to know why my name was there, pinned to that wall like I was part of some grand design I'd never agreed to be part of. Would you have tried to find out what your child was hiding, or would you have left that office locked and gone on with your grief? Comment yes or no below, because the answer matters more than you think. My name is Margaretta Harris. I've lived in this same corner of Des Moines, Iowa, for 40 years. The kind of life you don't photograph for magazines, quiet, routine, filled with the small rituals that hold a person together. I taught 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary for 32 years. I read novels by my window in the evenings. I made coffee at 5 in the morning. I gardened badly, but earnestly. I was the kind of woman people liked but didn't talk about. When Eli was born, my only child, born when I was 30, something shifted in my chest. It was like finding a door inside myself I didn't know existed. I'd grown up poor in West Virginia, in a house where my mother worked double shifts and my father worked nights. Love was there, but it was tired. It was stretched thin. I promised myself that if I ever had a child, they wouldn't know that kind of hunger. They wouldn't know what it felt like to wear the same shoes for 2 years or to pretend they weren't hungry so their parents could eat. Eli's father, Walter, was a kind man. Gentle. He had hands that knew how to build things, and a way of laughing that made him seem younger than he was. We married young, right out of high school. He worked as a contractor. We lived modestly, but never wanted. When Eli came, Walter cried. I remember that clearly, not delicate tears, but real sobs. He held our son like Eli was made of something sacred. I poured everything into raising him right. Every birthday, every school project, every moment he brought home a drawing or a good report card felt like I was building something permanent. I enrolled him in piano lessons. We read books together before bed. I attended every school play. I helped with homework at the kitchen table, sitting across from him as he concentrated, his little tongue poking out the side of his mouth the way it always did when he was thinking hard.
He was a good boy.
Thoughtful. Quiet. The kind of child who asked questions about why people were cruel to each other. Love doesn't guarantee understanding, though. Sometimes it blinds you completely. You see what you want to see. You miss what's right in front of you because you're so busy protecting the person you love that you forget to really know them. Eli grew up to be the person I wanted him to be: successful, kind, respectful. He went to college, then business school. He built a company from nothing. He called me every Sunday without fail. He came home for holidays. On the surface, everything was exactly as I'd planned it would be. A redemption story, really. My childhood was poverty and struggle. My son's life was stability and achievement. But underneath that perfect picture, there was something I couldn't see. Something Walter's death would unleash. If you grew up wanting to give your children everything you didn't have, this next part will hit different. Stay close. Walter had a heart attack on a Tuesday in March. We were watching the news after dinner. One moment he was reaching for his coffee, the next he was on the floor. Just like that. 30 seconds, and my life cracked open at the seams. Eli was 28, married to Rachel, who was gentle and practical. He kept himself together during the funeral in that way people do when they're trying to be strong. But I saw cracks. Small things. He'd stare at nothing for long stretches. He stopped calling Rachel back promptly. He began working longer hours. Then the questions started. Questions about Walter. What did he do? How did we live? How did we buy the house? He asked me about Walter's work, seemed almost obsessed with the details of his contracting business. I thought it was grief expressing itself strangely. I'd heard about the stages of loss. I thought this was part of it.
I was wrong about that.
6 months after Walter's funeral, Eli told me he was leaving Rachel. It was matter of fact, the way he said it. No drama. Just facts. She wanted things he couldn't give her anymore. He needed to focus on his work. They parted on good terms, but something inside Eli had shifted permanently. It was like watching someone slowly disappear even while they're standing right in front of you. He threw himself into his company with an intensity that scared me. He stopped going out.
He stopped dating.
He worked every single day, weekends included. When I asked him what the company did, I was his mother, after all. He'd give me vague answers.
Technology, consulting, digital security,
helping businesses protect their data. Nothing specific. Nothing I could really understand or visualize. Then came the glass office. It appeared in our backyard one summer, built by contractors over the course of 2 weeks. Eli designed it himself. Clean lines. Minimalist. Pure glass on all sides except the back wall. He furnished it with a desk, a filing cabinet, a high-end computer setup that looked like something from the future. Nothing personal. No photos.
No decorations.
Just the tools of work. He started spending his evenings out there. Every evening. I'd watch from my kitchen window as he'd lock the door behind him. Lock it, like he was sealing a vault, and then disappear into whatever was in his mind. Sometimes I'd see him on the computer. Sometimes he'd just sit in the dark, staring at nothing. That's when I realized grief doesn't just take people away. Sometimes it replaces them with someone you've never met before. Grief wasn't the only thing that had changed him. Something else had awakened inside my son the night his father died, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. If you've ever watched someone you love transform into a stranger, let me know in the comments. This is just the beginning of what I was about to discover. The locked office became the center of my worry. Not in an obvious way. I never confronted Eli about it. I wasn't the kind of mother who pushed. I asked gentle questions. What was he working on? Was everything okay at the company? Did he want me to bring dinner out to him? He'd give me small smiles and non-answers, and I'd retreat, telling myself to respect his boundaries. But I watched. I couldn't help it. Late at night, I'd hear his car pull into the driveway around 11 or midnight. He'd go straight to the glass office. The lights would come on, and then he'd sit there, sometimes for hours, barely moving. In the morning, he'd lock the door without fail and head to his downtown office downtown. He was living two separate lives, the professional Eli who existed in the world and the nighttime Eli who existed in that sealed glass space. There were phone calls, intense conversations at odd hours. I'd hear fragments through the glass or through my window. Names I didn't recognize. Amounts of money that made my throat tight. He never raised his voice, but there was urgency in it. Purpose. He sounded like someone on a mission, not someone doing a job. One night I saw him crying. I was in the kitchen making tea around 2 a.m. Insomnia had become my companion since Walter died, and I looked out at the backyard. The office light was on. Eli sat at his desk, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He was weeping. Real, wrenching sobs. I wanted to run out there. Every motherly instinct in me screamed to go to him, to hold him, to ask what was breaking him. But something stopped me. A feeling I couldn't name. Some part of me knew that if I opened that door, if I stepped into whatever he was carrying, things would change in ways I couldn't undo. So I stood at the kitchen window and watched my son cry alone in a glass room, and I did nothing. There were deliveries. Packages marked personal or private. He'd intercept them before I could even see what was arriving. Files would appear on his desk and then disappear. His computer screen always went dark when he heard me approaching. He was hiding something massive, something that required documentation and secrecy, and all these late nights spent over numbers and files and photographs. The donations started around that time. Large sums to charities I'd never heard of. A shelter in Denver. A legal aid clinic in Biloxi. A foundation for missing persons in Tulsa. When I asked him about it, he said he was interested in giving back. It was important to help people. That was all. I knocked on the glass door once. It was 7 p.m, and I'd made his favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. I'd kept it warm on the stove for 2 hours, waiting for him to come inside. When he didn't, I walked out there, the warm dish still in my hands. He didn't hear me at first. He was focused on his computer screen, typing something with intense concentration. His jaw was clenched. His knuckles were white around the mouse. I knocked. Soft, polite. A mother's knock. He froze. For a full 10 seconds, he didn't move. Then he closed the laptop and turned to face me. His expression was blank. Not angry, not sad, just completely neutral. Like a mask had slipped into place. He got up and walked to the door. Opened it just enough to step outside, pulling it shut behind him. We stood there on the concrete pad, him in his shirt sleeves and me holding the warm pot roast between us, like an offering. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I made dinner," I said. "Your favorite." "That's kind of you." "I ate already." "Eli, I'm worried about you."
Talk to me.
"What's happening in there? What are you working on?" He looked at that glass room like he was looking at a prison or a temple. "I still can't decide which." "There's nothing to worry about," he said. "I promise." But his hands were shaking. His eyes were empty. And in that moment, I saw a version of my son I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing his face. For weeks I kept trying to talk to him. For weeks he kept pushing me away. And then came the morning I couldn't push back anymore. Would you have broken into that locked office to find out what your son was hiding? Or would you have left him alone? Tell me in the comments, because Eli's entire life was about to collapse and nothing would ever be the same. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in February, exactly 3 years after Walter died. I was drinking my coffee, sitting at the kitchen table like I did every morning. The sun was just starting to come through the east window. I was reading an article about tulip varieties I wanted to plant in the spring. Normal. Routine. The kind of morning that doesn't know it's about to become a pivot point between before and after. The officer's name was Detective Morrison. I barely remembered the conversation afterward. My mind refused to hold onto the words. I kept asking him to repeat things. He was patient with me. He explained that my son had been found unresponsive in his apartment downtown. There were empty bottles, medication on the nightstand. He'd been dead for at least 48 hours before someone found him. Overdose, the detective said, though they were still waiting on the toxicology report. I didn't believe him. That was my first response. Not anger, not even sadness. Disbelief. Eli didn't do drugs. Eli was careful about his health. He didn't even drink much. The idea was impossible. But then the detective said something else. Something about finding my contact information in Eli's phone. Something about needing me to come identify the body. And the impossible became real in a way I still haven't fully processed. The funeral was a strange affair. Rachel came, tearful and confused. His colleagues from the company showed up, 15 or 20 people I'd never met. They were distant, polite, sad in a professional way. They didn't seem to know him, not really. They told me he was a good boss. Reliable.
Fair.
It was like they were describing a robot, not a human being. There were a few people I couldn't place. Men in dark suits who looked uncomfortable in the church. They didn't come to the reception. They stood in the back, and when the service ended, they left without speaking to anyone. I kept waiting for Rachel or one of his colleagues to tell me about his life. His dreams. His hobbies. What made him happy. But nobody had anything to offer. It was like my son had been a blank slate, and everyone had just drawn their own picture on top of it without ever really seeing him. The burial was small. Just me, Rachel, and the funeral director. I threw a handful of dirt on the casket, and it made a sound I'll never forget. That hollow thunk of earth on wood. Final. Absolute. When I got home, the house was too quiet. There was a pot roast congealing on the stove. I'd made it the night before, hoping he'd come by. I threw it out without tasting it. That's when I noticed the glass office in the backyard. The key was hanging on its usual hook by the kitchen door. Eli had gotten a second key made years ago and left it there, though I'd never asked him to. In case of emergency, he'd said vaguely. For weeks, I ignored it. I couldn't bear to look at it. Looking at that glass room felt like looking directly at my son's private thoughts. It felt like a violation to even consider it. But grief is a strange thing. It builds pressure inside you. It pushes you toward answers that don't make sense, toward truths you're not prepared to hear. It makes you do things you wouldn't normally do, not out of malice, but out of desperation. Out of the need to understand why the person you loved turned out to be someone you didn't know at all. So on a February morning, exactly 1 month after my son was buried, I took that key off the hook and walked out to the glass office. My hands were shaking. My breath was coming shallow. I felt like I was about to commit a crime, like I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The door opened, and my entire understanding of who my son was would change forever. Subscribe now, because what Margareta finds inside that locked office will challenge everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and what we're willing to do in secret to make things right. The smell hit me the same way it had when I first stepped through that door. Metallic.
Clean.
The smell of a space that's been locked away from the world. But this time, I was ready to look. This time, I wasn't just standing there in shock. This time, I was a mother searching for her son. The office was exactly as I described it. The corkboards. The photographs. My face under those 4 devastating words. But now that the initial panic had worn off, I could see the structure.
There was a system to this.
Eli's mind had organized something vast and complex, and he'd done it methodically. I moved through the room slowly, my fingertips trailing along the edge of his desk. The computer screen was dark. There were folders stacked in the filing cabinet, dozens of them, each one labeled with a date and a number. I opened one at random. Inside were photographs, bank statements, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. The photograph showed a woman, maybe 50 years old, smiling at the camera. The date below read, June 2019. Underneath were dozens of pages, court documents, an embezzlement case. She'd been accused of stealing from her employer, but the embezzlement charges had been dropped 6 months after this photograph was taken. There was a note in Eli's handwriting. Restitution made. Charges dismissed. New beginning. My hands were shaking as I pulled file after file. Each one told the same story. A person. A problem.
Elias intervention.
A resolution. A man in Denver who'd lost his home to fraud. Eli had documented the fraud, recovered his money, and bought him a new house. A woman in Biloxi whose medical debt had destroyed her family. Eli had paid it off. A teenager in Portland whose father had been unjustly imprisoned. Eli had hired lawyers and gotten him exonerated. Every single face on that wall represented a life my son had touched in secret. Every number represented money he'd spent to fix something broken. Every date represented the moment he'd decided someone's pain mattered enough to become his responsibility. I sank into his desk chair and wept. Not the sharp tears of grief, but something deeper. Something that contained grief and pride and confusion and a terrible, aching sense of loss. My son had been carrying all of this alone. All these people, all these secrets, all this weight. But there was something else. As I wiped my eyes and looked around the room again, I noticed something I'd missed in my initial shock. There was a second set of cork boards. And on those boards was a name. One name repeated over and over. Walter Harrison. My late husband. My throat went dry. Every single file on those boards was about Walter. Newspaper clippings from 30 years ago. Court documents I'd never seen. Bank records. Photographs of men I didn't recognize. And there, in the center, a single sentence written in Eli's handwriting. The man I never knew. My legs felt weak. I pulled myself up and moved closer to read the documents. As the words registered, as the full weight of what I was reading crashed down on me, I understood. I finally understood what my son had been doing in this glass room every single night. I finally understood why my name was on that wall, pinned under those 4 words. What Margareta discovers in Walter's files will destroy her, rebuild her, and force her to ask the most terrible question a mother can ask. Did she really know the man she married?
Stay tuned. I don't know how long I sat there. Time worked differently in that moment.
It could have been minutes or hours. My mind kept slipping away, unable to fully process what I was reading. The newspaper clipping was dated 1989. The headline read, Construction Company Faces Embezzlement Investigation. Walter's name was right there, bold and accusatory. The article detailed a missing $500,000 from a development project he'd been managing. Investors were furious. Criminal charges were being considered. But then the story just ended. No follow-up articles. No trial. No resolution. Just a blank space where the rest of the story should have been. Eli had filled in that blank space with meticulous documentation. Bank statements showing where the money had gone. 3 separate accounts. 3 different names. 3 different people. I recognized one of them immediately. Mr. Peterson, who'd owned the hardware store downtown where I'd bought paint and nails for years. A kind man with a limp. He'd had a stroke when he was 40, and it had bankrupted him. The second name was unfamiliar, but the accompanying documents explained it. Her name was Claire. She'd been my husband's daughter, my stepdaughter, from before he met me, from a brief relationship in his early 20s that he'd never mentioned to me in all our years together. She'd been homeless, living in her car with a newborn. Walter had stolen from his company to save her,
to give her a chance.
The third person was a man named James. The documents showed that he'd been in an abusive situation. A con artist had stolen his entire inheritance, leaving him unable to flee. Walter had paid to get him out, to help him disappear, to start over. Eli had found all of this. Eli had searched through decades of financial records and legal documents and publicly available information, and he traced every single stolen dollar to the people it had saved. He'd documented each one, each desperate act of my husband's secret kindness. And then Eli had done something that changed everything. He'd paid it all back. Every penny. Not to the company. The company had gone out of business decades ago. But to the families affected. To the investors. To anyone with a legitimate claim. The bank statements showed massive transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing out of accounts in Eli's name. Year after year. Decade after decade. It had taken him nearly 15 years to pay back everything his father had stolen, but he'd done it. Completely. Meticulously. I sank to the floor and read the letter that was pinned at the center of all those Walter files. It was in Eli's handwriting, but it was addressed to me. My name was at the top, "Dear Mom," in that careful script I knew so well. I was 28 years old when Dad died. The letter began. I was sitting at work when you called. I remember the way your voice cracked when you said his heart had stopped. I remember feeling nothing at first. Just blank. Like I'd been unplugged from the world. But that night, when I was alone, something shifted. I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he looked at you. The way he talked about his work. The way he was always so certain, so confident, so good. The next day, I started digging. I don't know why. I just had this feeling. This whisper of something not right. So I pulled his old financial records. And then I found it. I found the theft. I found the lies. I found the secret life he was living behind the public version we all knew. I was angry at first. Furious. But then I read the rest. I saw who he'd helped. I saw the choices he'd made. And I realized something that changed my entire life. He was a good man. A complicated man. A flawed man. But good. He stole to save people. And the people he saved needed saving. Their lives were worth more than the money, and I think he knew that. I think Dad knew that, and he was okay with paying the price for it. But then he died. And all those people he'd helped were left thinking they'd received charity, not knowing they'd received justice from someone who cared enough to break the law for them. That's when I decided I would finish what he started. I would find every person he'd helped. And I would make it right. Completely right. Not through crime, but through every legal means available to me. So, I built a company. I worked 16-hour days. I saved every penny. And I paid back everything he took. Not to clear his name. That wasn't my place. But to settle the debt. To honor the people he loved enough to steal for. Mom, I did this so you wouldn't have to carry the weight of knowing. So you could go on loving him without the burden of his secret. I did this so the people he saved wouldn't be haunted by a debt they didn't know they owed. I did this because I finally understood that love isn't always public. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it's hidden. Sometimes it looks like breaking the rules to save someone you'll never meet again. I kept my promise to him. And now the slate is clean. I sat there on that cold concrete floor of the glass office, holding my dead son's letter, and I understood the full weight of what he'd carried. He'd lived an entire life of penance for a father he'd only started to truly know after death had taken him away. Subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because the next chapter will reveal something even darker, something that forces Margareta to question everything she thought she knew about herself. What was her name doing on that wall? And what does it mean that Eli wrote those words? Debt settled. Final promise kept. My fingers were numb as I pulled open the filing cabinet drawer marked with my own name. Just Margareta. No last name. No date. Just my name in Eli's precise handwriting. Inside was a file so thick it could barely close. Photographs. Bank statements. Newspaper clippings. Court documents. And at the very front, a photograph of me I'd never seen before. It was taken from a distance at a grocery store, I think. I was standing at the produce section, reaching for tomatoes. I looked tired. I looked small. Below the photograph was a single date, 1984. Before Eli was born. My stomach turned. I opened the first document, and the world tilted beneath me. It was a court case. Dismissal of charges. My name. My age at the time, 22. The case details were vague, but the date was unmistakable. It was 3 months before I met Walter. I hadn't thought about that time in decades. I'd pushed it so far down into myself that I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. But seeing it here, documented and filed away, brought it all crashing back. I'd been desperate. Living with my mother in West Virginia. No job prospects. No education beyond high school. I'd been involved with someone I shouldn't have been. He'd needed money. I'd helped him get it. It wasn't smart. It wasn't legal. It was a moment of weakness and bad judgment that could have destroyed me. But I'd been lucky. The charges had been dropped. My mother had scraped together money for a lawyer. I'd been given a second chance. I'd left West Virginia after that. I'd started fresh. I'd met Walter. I'd built a good life. And I'd never told anyone, not my husband, not my son, about that terrible time. I'd locked it away and thrown away the key. Except Eli had found it. He'd searched through decades-old records. He'd uncovered my secret. And he'd documented it with the same meticulous care he'd used to document his father's. The rest of the file contained financial records. Money transferred to the law firm that had defended me. Donations made to the legal aid clinic in West Virginia that had helped people in my situation. Funding for youth outreach programs designed to keep kids from making the mistakes I'd made. He'd paid for my second chance twice over. He'd taken the shame I'd buried and transformed it into help for others. He'd honored the luck that had saved my life by extending that same luck to people I'd never meet. At the bottom of the file was a letter. It was dated 3 weeks before Eli died. His handwriting was shakier than usual, like his hands were trembling as he wrote. Dear Mom. I found it when I was looking through financial records for the company. A sealed court case from 1984. Your name. Details I couldn't quite understand at first. It took some digging to piece it together. At first I was shocked. My perfect mother. My model of strength and stability. You'd hidden something massive. Something that, in another timeline, could have destroyed everything. But then I realized something else. You were given a second chance. And you used it. You didn't squander it or repeat the mistakes or carry the shame into your new life. You became someone better. You built something good. That's where I got it from. That understanding that we're all one bad decision away from disaster. That we all deserve second chances. That love means helping people get back up. I paid for your legal defense again. Not because you asked. Not because you needed it. But because when I understood what you'd survived, I understood why you spent your whole life trying to protect me. Why you worried so much. Why you loved so fiercely. You were teaching me something. You were showing me that redemption is possible. That mistakes don't define us. That love is stronger than shame. I did this in secret because I knew it would hurt you to know that I knew. But I needed to honor that part of your story too. The part that almost broke you. The part that taught you how to be strong. You kept your promise to yourself to be better. I kept my promise to you to finish the work of making things right. Love, Eli. I fell apart. I crumpled that letter in my hands, and I fell completely apart. Because I understood, finally and fully, what my son had been doing in that glass room every single night. He'd been honoring us. Both of us. His father and his mother. He'd been carrying the weight of our secrets and transforming them into something good. He'd been paying debts we didn't even know we owed. And the words under my photograph, debt settled, final promise kept, weren't about my crime from 1984. They were about the promise I'd made to myself that day in the courtroom. The promise to be better. To do better. To become someone worthy of the second chance I'd been given. Eli had made sure that promise was kept. He'd made sure that the shame I'd carried became grace for other people. He'd taken the broken parts of both his parents and turned them into healing for strangers. The next chapter reveals the deepest truth of all, and a moral about love that will change how you see sacrifice forever. This is the moment everything crystallizes. Don't miss it. Subscribe, turn on your notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, if you knew someone was carrying this kind of burden in secret, what would you do? I found the final letter exactly where I expected to find it. in the center drawer of the desk, in a sealed envelope marked for Mom, to be opened after. His handwriting, his careful script, the same hand that had written all those other letters, all those documentation files, all those careful records. I held it for a long time before opening it. The envelope was thick, heavy with whatever pages were inside. I could see where he'd written the note multiple times, crossed it out, started over. The envelope itself was a document of his struggle to find the words. When I finally opened it, there were 4 pages. 4 pages of Eli's handwriting, written in what I could tell was deep emotion. Some words were pressed so hard the pen had torn the paper. Others were barely legible, like his hands had lost all strength. Mom, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. I couldn't read past that line. I sat there on the cold concrete floor of that glass room, my dead son's letter in my hands, and I sobbed. Not the polite grief of the funeral, not the shocked tears of discovery, but the kind of sobs that come from the deepest part of you, the kind that shake your whole body. When I could breathe again, I read on. I know you've probably found the office by now. You've probably seen the files. You've probably figured out most of what I've been doing all these years. And you're probably angry, or confused, or both. I need you to know that none of this was about judgment. None of this was about exposing you or Dad or anyone else. This was about understanding something I couldn't understand any other way. When Dad died, I felt like the ground disappeared. The man I thought I knew was suddenly revealed to be a complicated person I didn't know at all. And I realized something terrifying. I might not really know anyone. I might not really know you. I might not really know myself. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I investigated. I researched. I tried to understand the people I loved by looking at their choices, their sacrifices, their hidden moments. And what I found broke me open in the most beautiful way. I found a father who loved his family so much that he was willing to break the law to save people. I found a mother who survived impossible circumstances and built a life of goodness anyway. I found people, all of us, trying our very best with what we had, making mistakes, but fundamentally trying to do right by the people we love. The work I did, the company, the quiet justice, the payments, the investigations, it wasn't about judgment. It was about reverence. It was about honoring the weight you all carried. It was about saying, I see what you sacrificed. I see what you did in the dark. And it matters. But, Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I couldn't say out loud. Something I could only write. The weight I was carrying got heavier. With each person I helped, with each debt I settled, with each secret I uncovered, it got heavier. I thought if I kept working, kept paying, kept documenting, eventually I'd balance the scales. Eventually I'd understand. Eventually things would make sense. But they didn't. The weight only got heavier. I started to understand that you can't fix everything. You can't save everyone. You can't undo all the harm that happens in the world just by working hard enough. There's too much pain, too much suffering, too much that exists beyond your control. And I realized something else. I realized I was so focused on paying debts and settling scores that I stopped actually living. I stopped feeling joy. I stopped connecting with people. I became a machine, processing tragedy after tragedy, trying to transform it all into something good. I don't say this to make you feel guilty. I say it because I want you to understand that I made a choice. A final choice. And it wasn't made in a moment of weakness. It was made after years of thinking, processing, understanding. I was tired, Mom. I was so tired. And I couldn't see any end to the tiredness. But here's what I need you to know, and this is the most important thing in this entire letter. I am not sad. I am not regretful. I am not broken. I lived a full life in the time I had. I helped people. I honored my father's memory. I honored your strength. I tried to make the world a little less broken than I found it. Maybe I didn't do it in a sustainable way. Maybe I took on too much. Maybe I confused self-sacrifice with purpose. But Mom, in trying to understand you and Dad, I became myself. I learned what I valued. I learned what I was willing to do. and what I wasn't. I learned that love is the only thing that matters. And I spent years showing people that their lives mattered. That's not nothing. Don't mourn me. Remember me. Tell people about the work, about the quiet justice, about how sometimes the people closest to us are fighting battles we can't see.
Talk about it.
Write about it. Make it mean something. And, Mom, let yourself be happy. Let yourself be free from the guilt of your past. You've paid your debt 1,000 times over just by being you. By raising me with love. By showing me what strength looks like. I kept my promise to Dad. I kept my promise to you. And now I'm asking you to keep a promise to yourself. Be happy. Be alive. Be the woman you deserve to be. All my love, Eli. I read that letter 5 times. I sat in that glass room with my dead son's words, and I read it until the words blurred and I couldn't read anymore. Until everything in me had shifted. He wasn't a victim. He was choosing. He was wise. He was tired, but he was choosing. He was giving me permission to let him go. And in that moment, something inside me finally broke open. Not in pain, but in understanding. Not in despair, but in grace. My son had lived and died on his own terms. And he'd asked me to honor that by living on mine. 6 months after I found Eli's office, I started making phone calls. I had a list of names, addresses, phone numbers. I'd spent 2 months going through every file, every photograph, every document that Eli had left behind. The first person I called was Claire, Eli's half-sister. She was living in Colorado now, working as a therapist. She had 2 children, a husband, a full life. When I told her who I was, she cried. She told me that a stranger had paid for her college education, that an anonymous donor had saved her life. Your son, I said. My son. He did that. She came to Iowa. We sat in my kitchen, not the glass office, but the warm, ordinary kitchen where I'd raised Eli. We drank coffee, and she told me stories about her life. I told her stories about Eli. We talked about Walter. We talked about second chances, and how sometimes the people who save us change our entire trajectory without ever asking for recognition. The second person I called was James. He'd moved to Portland. He was running a nonprofit for abuse survivors. He told me that 22 years ago, a stranger had helped him escape a dangerous situation. That stranger had given him money, resources, and most importantly, dignity. James had spent the last 2 decades paying that forward. I told him about Eli. I told him that it wasn't a stranger. It was my husband. It was my son. It was family, carrying a debt that wasn't theirs to carry, but that they carried anyway out of love. One by one, I contacted everyone in those files. Not all of them responded. Some had moved on completely, had buried that period of their lives. But many did. Many came to know about the quiet man who'd spent his life ensuring their futures. I created a foundation in Eli's name, Quiet Justice. It funds legal defense for people who can't afford it. It helps people escape difficult situations. It provides second chances. Everything Eli would have wanted, everything he secretly believed in. I opened his glass office to a small group of people. Not as a museum, but as a place of reflection. I kept all his files there. I told his story. I told Walter's story. I told my own.
People came.
Other mothers. Other families. People carrying secrets. People wondering if they were the only ones struggling. People desperate to know if other people had also made mistakes they were ashamed of. I told them yes. We all make mistakes. We all carry secrets. We all do the best we can with what we have. And sometimes the people we love are doing incredible things in the dark, and we never know. A year after I opened the glass office, a woman came who shook my entire understanding of my life once more. She was in her 80s. She'd grown up poor in West Virginia. We talked for 3 hours, and in the middle of our conversation, I realized I recognized her. She'd been my mother's friend. She'd helped my mother raise me after my father left. She'd brought us food when money was tight. She'd been there. I always wondered what happened to you, she told me. Your mother was so proud of you. My mother never told me that.
I said. She wouldn't have. She was the kind of woman who showed love by letting you fly. She never wanted you to feel like you owed her anything. I realized in that moment that the chain of quiet love, quiet sacrifice, quiet justice went back further than I'd known. My mother had done for me what I'd tried to do for my children, what Eli had done for strangers, what Walter had done for people he barely knew. We were all paying it forward, all of us, generation after generation, trying to make each other's lives better, asking nothing in return, carrying the weight in silence. The last thing I did was write a letter of my own. I posted it on the wall of Eli's glass office, where anyone could read it. To my son, it said, "You kept your promise. You settled the debts. You honored your father. You helped people you would never meet. You lived a life of quiet justice and deep love. I don't mourn you as I did at your funeral. I celebrate you. I celebrate the man you became. I celebrate the choices you made, even the final one that took you from us. You taught me something that changed my life. You taught me that love doesn't always look like what the world expects it to. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like secrets. Sometimes it looks like a locked glass office where one person bears the weight of the world on their shoulders. But here's what I want the world to know. Here's what I want everyone who reads this to understand. That person, the one carrying everything in silence, they matter. Their work matters. Their pain matters. Their choice to bear weight so that others don't have to matters. You kept your promise, Eli. Justice found its peace through you. And now, I'm keeping mine. I'm telling your story. I'm honoring your memory. I'm making sure that the people you helped know that they weren't helped by chance. They were helped by someone who loved them enough to carry their pain as his own. Be at peace, my son. You've earned it. With all my love, Mom. I light a candle every morning in that glass office. I stand there, and I remember. I remember my son's quiet voice, his careful handwriting, his fierce devotion to making things right. And I know that somewhere he's watching, hoping I found peace, hoping I finally understood that love isn't always visible, but it's always there, working in the dark, building something better, one quiet choice at a time. You never truly know someone's pain. Silent battles are the hardest fought. And sometimes, the people closest to us are carrying worlds on their shoulders, asking for nothing, giving everything. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss another story about love, sacrifice, and the quiet battles people fight in the dark. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Tell them in the comments what this story means to you. Tell them about the quiet sacrifices you've witnessed. Tell them about the people in your life who are carrying weight silently. Because that's how we honor people like Eli. We see them. We acknowledge them. We let them know they mattered. We spread their story so that their life and their death mean something. Thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about stories that matter.